Current and former prisoners in Alabama have filed a lawsuit earlier this week arguing that the prison system in the state effectively amounts to what they're calling a modern day form of slavery that either does or should violate the constitutions of both the United States as well as Alabama. There are labor unions who are working with these prisoners to advance this lawsuit, and they're alleging that Alabama profits to the tune of more than $450 million a year through coerced work, and that fast food companies and other private corporations benefit from an unlawful, quote, labor trafficking scheme. So basically what they're saying is that inmates work against their will, and the Alabama Department of Corrections takes 40% of the gross earnings purportedly to assist in defraying the cost of his or her incarceration. So now you have to work at McDonald's to help pay for your incarceration, which is a thing that you want to cover, or like you're being held against your will. I don't understand why you would be expected to pay for that, but that's what they're saying. Plaintiffs noted that the amount is shocking given that the Alabama Department of Corrections facilities were recently found by the DOJ to be significantly deficient. So really rough conditions that are not well funded, even though hundreds of millions of dollars are being brought in by this forced labor scheme. A number of different prisoners have been very forthright in detail in their experience as being a part of this lawsuit. And we want to focus on one, their story. This is Lakira Walker, who was incarcerated from 2007 to 2023. She said that for years she was forced to perform long hours of uncompensated work that included housekeeping, stripping floors, providing care for mentally disabled or other ill incarcerated people, unloading chemical trucks, working inside freezers, and at Burger King. She said she was paid just $2 per day and was subjected to sexual harassment by a supervising officer. And while America notably is not a country that cares very much about sexual harassment, can you imagine how little recourse you have inside of this forced labor scheme if you are being abused or harassed in literally any way? What the hell are you going to do? What justice can you possibly hope for in that situation? She said, by the way, she was forced to work even when ill, and that the job placement officer told her she must, quote, get up and go make us our 40%. So it is clear what this is about and how little respect or care, compassion they have for these prisoners. Waz, what do you make of this?
I mean, it's a tale as old as time, isn't it? Exploitation of a worker. Even if these felons are, a class of worker that we consider to be at the bottom of the totem pole and we look down upon them collectively as a society, they're workers, they're generating value via their labor. And that doesn't, just because they committed a crime and now are ward of the state means that they should be exploited, right? And so the idea that the state could garnish your wages from the work that you did because they've incarcerated you. Sorry, that's not how this works. We don't make people work off their own prison incarceration, the costs incurred while they're in prison. That just makes absolutely no sense. And the idea that they would take that off at the top. And of course, these private companies, why do they get to profit off of these people's work by paying them a pittance? It makes absolutely no sense. Obviously, this is criminal, unconstitutional, and they should get their just due, even if, yes, they've committed heinous crimes in the past, right? They don't cease to be human beings. They don't cease to be people with some measure of human dignity that they deserve, whether they committed a crime or not.
Yeah, some I'm sure committed heinous crimes, some committed much lighter crimes. I would be worried about the possibility that some of them might in fact be innocent, but this is Alabama, so I'm sure that nothing like that ever happened. So again, look, this makes financial sense from the point of view of the states. We'll get to that. But to the argument that this goes against the Constitution, they argue that the system that's been set up in this state and others violates the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution, which guarantees equal protection regardless of race. They point out obviously that this predominantly impacts black and brown prisoners, as well as a recent amendment to Alabama's state constitution, which bars involuntary servitude as punishment for a crime, when that is exactly what this is. But by the way, this goes beyond just Alabama. The lawsuit is specific to Alabama, but perhaps it could get broader because 7 state prison systems, this is Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina, and Texas. So very diverse pool of states there. from all roughly contiguous section of the country, pay nothing for the vast majority of prison work. Other states pay between 15 and 52 cents per hour for non-industry jobs. Prison laborers often see up to 80% of their paycheck withheld for taxes, room and board expenses, and court costs, leaving them 20% of their effectively nothing. And the difficult thing was about talking about this is we always have this job. And I try to remind people of how there's this asymmetry between like the broad left media and broad right media. Right media gets people worked up to hate and want to suppress different groups. We have a slightly harder job, which is we try to do in the way that like Bernie Sanders once said, where he tried to encourage people to fight for someone they don't know. We want you to extend empathy and compassion to people that you don't know, people who are not necessarily like you, people who might even have done bad things, because even though they did bad things, and remember, there's a wide variety of bad things, some far less than others, they are still humans. And the right wing knows that most people don't care what happens to prisoners. They don't care about this. They don't care if it was way worse than this. There are a lot of Americans out there that have been trained and raised to believe that anything that happens inside of a prison is a just reward for what they have done. Whereas we want principles to apply to every American, compassion and decency to be extended to every American. And I know that that's harder. There is a natural human inclination to want to be like, you cross the line, to hell with you. But understand that like this is an extension of how workers across America are abused. They're being abused worse, but it's a part of the same ideology. And our fight should be, I think it should incorporate both groups. But Waz, what are your final thoughts about this story?
I mean, obviously, amen to what you just said. But again, I don't even this doesn't need to be a moralistic stance. You can look at it another way. The fact that they're putting this group of workforce to work so that they could pay them a pittance. These are jobs that they're not giving to people who are outside. Yeah. I mean, you can look at it at a more cynical factor. They're doing this as to not pay people who are incarcerated and who aren't incarcerated and do have actual bills to pay, actual families to feed, and so that's one way to look at it if you want to be cynical. They're screwing over the non-incarcerated American worker. Everybody gets screwed in this deal. And the people who profit, of course, as always, and benefit the most are those bastards at the top of this food chain.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you could lump this in with the, trying to, allow kids to work longer hours in dangerous circumstances, like
or shipping all of our jobs overseas because they know the CCP can crack down on those workers and force them to work for ungodly wages and in the worst conditions. But guess what? You get to turn a better profit. So 100%. To hell with it. Yeah. To hell with the American worker. To hell to those workers in China who are being subjugated. Those people at the top still get to keep their bread.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.